Yeah, thank you, Lars, for this very kind introduction. Yeah, so I have to say I'm still at Logistics University, but only until the end of this year, and from January onwards, then I will join Aarhus University. And yeah, I'm quite new to the topic of fintech, to the topic of digital finance, I have to say, and that is why, of course, for me, such opportunities to present this research to a crowd that is well versed in this topic is a really great opportunity. Yeah. And so my view on fintech research when I was at some of these events is that there is quite a lot of focus on things like crowdfunding, crowd investing, cryptocurrencies, and these kind of topics, and I bring a bit of a different focus to you today, which is investment algorithms or robo-advisors, where they very often are used. And well, this is something that has been reported in the media quite frequently recently, and it seems that it's finally taking hold in Europe, as the Wall Street Journal suggests, maybe a couple of years later than in the US, as always, maybe. And that is now something that targets, of course, private investors. And these newspapers ask whether it is a good idea to trust in these robo-advisors and to invest with these new financial intermediaries instead of traditional bank advice or fund managers or the like. And here this guy down here, this is Pepper, and apparently this little robot was also used by German savings banks to interact with customers. Maybe this is also the way people imagine a robo-advisor to look like, but that is of course far from reality, as we know that the typical robo-advisor is nothing more than an investment algorithm and does not need any human shape or appearance. And indeed, there are quite a couple of new players on this market. So in the US, Wealth from Betterment are two examples, which both now have more than $10 billion under management. In Germany, the largest one is Scalable with more than €1 billion of assets under management. And this is a bit contrary to what people may have believed even a couple of years ago. For example, in a report by Bain & Company, they state that over many years, the fund industry has operated with a false sense of security, assuming that algorithms and computing power would digitize and revolutionize trading, but that the right products would ultimately be selected by humans. So within this transformation that is going on, this seems to change, and there is no real need for human intervention in choosing financial products for the typical retail customer. Yeah, and this progress has been greeted also from a scientific perspective, I think, with quite some positive views. First of all, there are obvious economies of scale in that business, because for a typical private investor, this can provide a standard that is available at relatively low cost to a broad population. And by this, it might also solve this problem of financial advisor fees. So as we know, the commission-based fees create a principal agent problem and a conflict of interest between the advisor and the client. Nevertheless, they have been quite the norm in selling financial products. And so one way to address this was, for example, by the UK government to forbid these commission-based fees and instead only allow fixed fees. But then again, of course, these fixed fees to many clients appear very expensive, and that might mean that if there's only advice where a fixed fee model available, many will not take any advice at all. And that might even be worse than operating within this commission-based model. And of course, a robo-advice solution could solve this problem by being relatively cheap, cheaply available, and thus provide a new option to these customers. At a certain point, looking at these companies that are out there in the moment, most of them seem to provide relatively sound advice from an academic point of view. So most robo-advisors are in the field of diversified investments, of passive investments, where you, depending on your personal preferences, your risk aversion, receive a bundle of ETFs, for example. And that is, of course, something that we would agree is a sensible strategy. It might also lead to less discrimination and exploitation. So, assuming that a robo-advisor provides impartial advice to whatever client there is, whereas, of course, with human interaction, you might always have the problem that maybe advisors might want to take advantage of the more financially illiterate and sell them products that they actually don't need and don't understand. And finally, even from a regulatory point of view, it could be that these investment algorithms are relatively easy to supervise if they just provide the agency with access to the underlying code, and then in principle everything can be checked, and so that could be an advantage as well, but maybe that is further down the line in the future. So from this list here, this seems all very positive, but at the same time some concerns have been noted. It's not given that this will be a success. So as of now, we cannot say whether robo-advice will be the standard in the future. According to newest numbers, we have in the moment roughly about 300,000 clients in Germany. And if you look at the overall market of retail investors, this is of course still a very small market share. And there are also some startups in this area which are already in trouble because attracting clients is not easy and acquisition costs seem to be relatively high. So I have heard of estimates roughly between 500 and 1,000 euro acquisition cost for each client. And that means, of course, if you think about total expense ratios below 1% for these products, it will take quite a while to break even on these costs. And maybe surprisingly for you, it was at least for me, is that according to a recent survey, it is in particular the group of millennials that are a primary target for these intermediaries seem to prefer traditional financial advice to an investment algorithms. So one might have thought it will just take a little bit of time until the digital natives are in their middle ages, and then this will take off. But apparently, this might not be the case if especially this age group has preferences for more traditional bank advice-based model. And and there are already some institutions who shut down their robo-advisors or have given up on that. So Commerzbank is an example, UBS as well. And on the other hand, of the existing robo-advisors like Betterment, they have introduced human financial advisors to their service, at least to their high network clients. So they are starting to run a bit of a hybrid model as well, because there was a demand from the investor side that they wanted to have a human touch point there where they could ask questions or discuss things, and they reacted on that and introduced that human financial advice. And then, of course, there is the problem of regulation. As always, when new business models come up with these fintech companies, which regulation they have to adhere to, and there are calls for additional regulation, as for example, exemplified in this article in the Handelsblatt. And some even goes as far as to conclude, was that it for robos? So maybe it's already over. So it's, I think, still pretty much open what will happen in this area in the future, and and our research here wants to contribute to that by looking at a very specific question, which is the question of algorithm aversion. By the way, this is joint work with Maximilian Germann, who was a PhD student at the University of Mannheim, and then after receiving his PhD has left to the dark side, to McKinsey research there, and so in the moment I have to push this project forward as he is no longer available. What is algorithm aversion about? So the basic question is, which intermediary would you choose, the robo or the algorithm or the human? And under algorithm aversion, we understand a preference for a human expert even if the algorithm outperforms. And our definition of an algorithm is relatively simple: an automated formula or rule that is used to process data. Oh, sorry, that should be wrong. Okay, so this is all the video now. And there has been literature on this topic of algorithm aversion, coming from the psychology perspective. Relatively famous paper by Simmons Massey, where they discovered that people rely on predictions by humans in various domains. For example, predicting the student performance at a university, predicting US air traffic numbers, and also tying their incentives to humans, even when they could observe the superior performance of algorithms. And in particular, what they found is that people react very negatively when they saw algorithms making mistakes. So that means you somehow seem to believe that if an algorithm makes a mistake, then this is part of how it is programmed, and it will make this mistake over and over again. And that is why people lose trust relatively quickly when they observe a mistake by algorithm. And in other literature, there is recommendations from physicians that are rated higher than those from a computer system or a physician aided by a computer system. Because apparently using a computer seems to undermine the impression of competence of these doctors here, as you might believe that my doctor has to Google that, then he is not an expert. And even in domains where this is a quite funny study here, where they looked into recommendation systems for jokes. And what you do there is that you view a couple of jokes and you rate them how funny you perceive these jokes, and then an algorithm recommends further jokes to you. And this algorithm works quite well. So people rate these jokes recommended by the algorithm as funnier than jokes recommended by humans. However, they still prefer to receive recommendations from humans. Perhaps because they think that humor, that is a very human quality, and how can an algorithm judge humor? And then, of course, there is a very old literature on statistical versus clinical prediction, started already in the 50s, about the question whether predictions based on numbers using statistical techniques outperform clinical predictions by humans. Well, and now we take this research to finance and ask ourselves, okay, what is it with algorithm aversion in finance? Do we observe a similar phenomenon here? And there is not much research on this so far. A relatively well-known theory paper by Giannotto, Schleifer, and co-authors make the claim that fund managers and advisors act as money-doctors. Because there is this long-standing finding in the fund literature that active mutual funds do not outperform passive investments. So the question is, why do people still use fund managers? And their model is based on the idea that these fund managers are not primarily having the task to outperform, but that they also serve as money doctors, meaning that they take the client by the hand and by this hand holding allow them to invest into risky assets and can provide this comfort that one needs. And in logical question then is whether a money doctor necessarily needs to be a human, or whether a robot advisor can also fulfill this role as a money doctor. And in a study by Locke, she looks into algorithm aversion in different domains and finds that this very much depends on the decision context. So whether it is a decision that relates to our preferences, or whether it is a rather logical, quantitative decision, that might affect strongly whether people are algorithm averse or not. And therefore, of course, we can ask ourselves whether finance is a field where people expect algorithms to do well, because it's a quantitative field, because it's a field where you probably can analyze a large amount of data and then come to some conclusions based on this data. And some papers in finance studying this seem to rather find evidence in favor of aversion in quite different settings. Alright, so what do we do now? So we thought about this and decided to run an experiment. And we wanted to do a relatively simple experiment, and it shows a design that is based on Camilla Kunz's GF paper 2015, where she sets up a very simple market in which two securities can be purchased. One is the bond that pays a certain €3, and the other is a stock that pays either €5 or €1. And this stock can be in a good state, and in this good state the probability to receive €5 is 70%, and the probability to receive €1 is 30%, but they can also occur a bad state, and in this bad state the probabilities are reversed. And this state is constant across a number of investments. So that means you can observe the outcomes of the stock and can, from the results, infer, of course, whether it is more likely that we are in a good state or in a bad state. And in the original paper, Kuhn uses this to make some inferences on people's learning. But that is not our goal here. That is why we introduce an intermediary, meaning that you do not invest into these two securities, stock and bond yourself, but you invest through an intermediary. And this can either be a human fund manager or an investment algorithm. And you make one choice at the beginning of a block of investments, whether you would like to invest with the human fund manager or the algorithm. And then the intermediary invests for 6 trials. So one block consists of 6 trials. And then the participants observe the outcomes of the choices and results of those intermediaries and make their choice for the next block. And we have 10 of these blocks in total. And of course the whole thing is incentivized, so the participants earn wealth from a randomly drawn block of these 10 blocks they invest. Okay, so what are the two intermediaries? On the one hand we have the algorithm, and the algorithm simply maximizes expected return by using Bayes' law. And as the prior probabilities are known, of course you can relatively simple calculate the probability for each state and then behave accordingly. And we all also tell participants, okay, this algorithm will maximize return. We don't disclose the exact strategy that algorithm uses. I mean, most people probably don't even know how Bayes' law works, and therefore it's not of interest, and it's also closer to reality, where you will typically also not find the disclosure of what strategy a particular robot rather follows. And in case the expected return is equal for the bond and stock, then the algorithm randomizes. And by that, of course, from an ex-ante perspective, the decisions of this algorithm are correct. But of course, it can happen that this algorithm makes mistakes. For example, chooses the stock, and the stock provides only a return of €1. And or choosing the bond, and the stock provides a return of €5. And these are exactly the mistakes that we want to observe, because we want to operate in an environment where it is possible for the algorithm to make errors. And then the question is, how do people respond to these errors?
So can you say anything about your assumption about the risk attitude of the people who choose the algorithm? Because I mean, even if you're maximizing expected returns, right, it can still be that people are just very risk averse.
Yeah, so this is true, of course. I mean, there is quite a bit of discussion in the experimental literature about risk aversion in small stake gambles. So usually, I mean, for gambles in the area of 3 to 5 euro, if you show relatively strong risk aversion there, that would mean that you should be extremely risk averse when it comes to higher stakes. Nevertheless, it's of course possible that people are risk averse and would probably prefer the algorithm only to select a stock when the probability is maybe above 60, 70%. So that could be one reason to select the human fund manager, believing that the human fund manager might be following a more risk-averse strategy. However, this is not what our human fund managers do. So we can see in the data that they are, if anything, they are even a bit more risk-seeking than the algorithm. And of course, as people can observe these choices, they would quickly learn, okay, the human does not make more risk-averse choices. So therefore, in the end, at least after having some observations, risk aversion should not be the primary driver of these decisions. Let me say something about our human fund managers. So we select human fund managers as real persons from participants, because we do not want to simulate human fund managers, because then they would be somehow quasi-algorithms. So we need real people. And how do we select these people? Well, we let all participants complete a financial literacy and numeracy quiz. And then the participant with the highest score is anonymously appointed as a fund manager. And as everyone knows that this is the procedure we follow, we believe that this person that is selected is perceived as competent and financially literate. Maybe not as literate as a real financial expert, and that is where some criticism is drawn with respect to our design. However, we try to select a person that is perceived as relatively competent. And we provide incentives, of course, for this as well. So the fund manager can earn the wealth from a randomly drawn block. And the difference to the normal participants is that these normal participants have to pay a fee, which means that as a human fund manager, you will probably earn more than the investors. And indeed, we find that people try to fill out these quizzes as best as possible, so there's no evidence that we have participants that say, oh no, I don't want to be the fund manager, let me alone, and they sabotage themselves. Things like that do not happen. Okay, so here's an overview on our experimental design. So the experiment starts with financial literacy and numeracy test. Then the top performer in this test is appointed as fund manager. Then all the other participants, this is why this is here in gray, they select whether they want to invest for with the human or the algorithm. And then the human and the algorithm invest in either the stock or bond over a total of 6 trials. And this constitutes then one block of investing. At the beginning, a choice by the participants who act as investors, then a choice by the intermediaries, and this is repeated 6 times. And then we have another 9 blocks of the same procedure afterwards. Yeah, so feel free to ask questions in between. So this would be the outline of the experiment. And well, then we wanted to go a step further and not have just a 0-1 decision. Do you want to invest with the human or the algorithm? So we try to elicit participants' relative preferences for intermediaries. So, and that we do by fees. We keep the fee for the human fund manager fixed, so that human fund manager always costs you €2. And the algorithm costs 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4 euro. And then for each possible cost combinations, participants have to indicate their preference for either intermediary. So I can show you that on the screen as well. So this is how that looks like. So people familiar with Z-tree will immediately recognize these nice Z-tree screens here. Here. So the question is on the top, you can choose the intermediary with whom you want to invest, and now you have not just one choice to make, but 5 choices. And we have here in the middle, we have the choice with equal fees, and that is the choice I will be talking about today mostly. Because it turned out that people react very sensitively to these fees, and very few select the more expensive intermediary. And afterwards we realized maybe we have chosen the differences in the fees too large, because €1 is quite something that you in that design an outperformance of €1 is quite something. Yes. So and that is maybe by making these fee differences smaller, we would obtain here more informative results, let's say. Good, and then what you observe within the rounds is the following. So on the left-hand side, you see the results of the 2 assets. Well, for the bond, this is not so interesting. This is always €3. But for the stock, of course, this tells you something about the potential state we are in. And here we see the choice of the human fund manager and the algorithm. And we see the algorithm has, in the first round, obviously chosen the stock. But then, after the stock had a poor result, quickly turned to the bond and invested in the bond for the trials 2 to 4. But as you can see here, in the 4th round, this was a mistake, at least ex post. Of course, we know that from a basic perspective, the algorithm was perfectly right to choose the bond because the stock was doing poorly. But from an ex post perspective, of course, here the stock performed bad. And here we see the human fund manager. Well, the human fund manager stuck to the stock and chose the stock in all trials. Okay. And of course, these fees also have some consequences. So we always draw randomly one fee combination, and this choice is then implemented and has cash consequences for participants. And here once again, so this is exactly the incentive to become fund manager, because the investors only get the net return after fees, and the fund manager gets the gross return. Yeah, you might ask yourself why the fund manager receives return on the investments. Should he not rather get the fees by the customers? So we thought about such a setting as well, but this of course introduces all kinds of strategic motives that could be in play, and that is something we wanted to exclude here, because then in such a scenario, when a fund manager would receive the fees of the other participants, then he needs to somehow try to attract participants to invest with her or with him, and that might have unforeseeable consequences. So we wanted to shut down this channel, and that is why the fund manager also gets the returns of the investments. All right, and as a second part of this experiment that actually was executed several weeks before the main experiment, we asked a questionnaire on how people perceive algorithms. And we do that separately from the main experiment, because we do not want that these perceptions are driven by people's experiences in the experiment, but we rather want to capture what people think about algorithms in general. And we select some suggestions from the literature by which algorithms and humans may differ. So how they aggregate data, for example, whether their performance differs, and so on. And we ask these questions on 5-point Likert scales, whether people agree to these statements. Okay, so we did this in the lab in Mannheim. So here's a picture of that lab. This is a typical econ lab. And I was told that you here have recently established such a lab as well. Maybe it will look like very similar to this. So we have these cubicles, and people are sitting in these cubicles. And we do sessions with 10 participants. Because we want to have one fund manager and 9 investors in each session. And then there were some no-shows, and that is why sometimes we only have 8 people. Total 114 participants, and with 107 we were able to match the survey data. So actually they should have a code when they enter the main experiment that then allows us to match the survey data, but there were some people that somehow had forgotten this code or could not retrieve it, and then that was not possible anymore. And as we need one fund manager in each of these 12 sessions, we have a total of 12 fund managers and 102 investors. And will the demographics look typically as in such a lab? 22.8 is the average age. We have slightly more females in the lab, and well, at least some of them had already invested in stocks in their lifetime, which is interesting, so they bring in some investment experience. And you can also see that our payers are quite sensitive to what people are doing in the lab, so you could receive anything between 4 and 30 euro. Okay. So far about the design and the participants, so let's go directly to the results. So first start with the perceptions. So here are the statements on algorithms, whether they achieve higher returns than human fund managers, learn better, use qualitative data better, aggregate data better, weight data better, deal with outlier better. And the final question is whether algorithms are rather viewed as an aid instead of a competitor of human fund managers. And of course, we always ask two versions randomly, so either the algorithm achieves high returns or the human fund manager achieves higher returns, because there is a phenomenon in such surveys that you always have a tendency to agree to whatever statement is given to you. So we counterbalance that, so that we have always two versions of this. Well, and people's responses seem to be relatively intuitive if we only concentrate on the highly significant results. So it seems to be the case that people do not trust algorithms so much when it comes to qualitative data, as we might imagine. And also they don't think that they can deal so well with outliers. And that pertains to a view that is held in the literature, or even more in practice, that human fund managers will tell you if something like a financial crisis will happen, then you really do need to deal with that, because an algorithm will not be able to deal with such an extreme event. And this, at least to some degree, is shared by our participants. So here, in that case, they perceive the humans as more confident. On the other hand, they see slight advantages on the side of the algorithm for learning, and an even larger advantage when it comes to higher returns. And that is probably what matters most in the experiment. And finally, we also perceive the algorithm as an aid instead of a competitor. So maybe this hybrid model is really what people are looking for. So a human assisted by an algorithm, and maybe letting the algorithm run the show for most of the time, but then having the possibility to intervene in case that something extraordinary happens. Okay. So first, let us take a look at the decisions of the intermediaries. So these are the 6 trials. And as you saw, information is revealed in the course of these trials, and that means we would expect both intermediaries actually to get better with each trial. And indeed, they pretty much start off with 50% when it comes to the decisions they make. And then we see the decisions of the algorithm in blue and the human in red from an ex-ante perspective. And the dashed lines are from an ex-post perspective. And of course, as the ex-post perspective always involves some luck, they are achieving maybe 60%, or the humans even just slightly above 50%. Whereas, of course, if you look at things from the ex-ante perspective, this looks a bit better there. And the algorithm approaches 90% in the 6th round. This is why we also cut it off after 6 trials. So we, of course, did some tests on that, and we saw, okay, after 6 trials, you relatively have identified the which state we are in. So it does not make sense to run 10 trials or more. Now you probably wonder why I say that the algorithm is not perfectly optimal ex ante, because before I said, well, from a basic perspective, he is always right. That is true, but here, what I understand under optimal is identifying the asset that in the given state is the optimal asset. So that means in the good state, selecting the stock, and in the bad state, selecting the bond. So this class actually shows you whether the intermediates have identified the state at each given point in time. And as a consequence of this, of course, the payoffs differ between the algorithm and the human. And here you see the full distribution. So quite often both intermediaries provide the same payoff, and then it can happen that the algorithm outperforms, and it can happen that the human outperforms. What you can see is that the algorithm sometimes outperforms the human dramatically, so it can be even 8 to 12 euros, whereas on the other hand, for the human, it is very difficult to outperform the algorithm by more than 2 euros, which is, if the setting is somewhat obvious, because the algorithm makes Bayesian decisions, so it might mean a lot of bad luck to underperform by much. Yeah. So, whereas of course the humans can make poor choices. And the overall result is that on average the algorithm outperforms by 58 cents per block. And there you see probably why our fee result was not so powerful as we hoped for, because this outperformance is not strong enough that in the presence of a higher fee you would still select such an intermediate. So that is our main result probably here. What do investors do? Because we are not so much interested in what the intermediaries do. I showed you that for illustration, that you can see, okay, is that reasonable what these intermediaries do? But of course, we are more interested in investors. And we differentiate between the first choice they make and the subsequent choices during the experiment. Because the first choice is one that is not influenced by any performance history. So that means people have to rely on what they bring in by prior perceptions of algorithms, and by, of course, the description of the decision problem they have received. And in this situation, 56% choose the algorithm in our equal fee design. And we take this as evidence for the absence of algorithm inversion. So the 56% in our sample size, the 56% are not significantly larger than 50%. So we cannot say that people are algorithm loving, but the 56% are significantly larger than say 40%. So we can exclude that there is any strong algorithm aversion. Well, in these feed choices, there, as I told you, there is a very strong preference for the cheaper intermediaries. So we see a very strong results in that direction. So we can not really make much of this. So because people react so sensitively to these fees. Yes.
But under the condition that even equal fees apply, it's still that the algorithm outperforms the human manager, right? So meaning that if 56% choose the algorithm under equal fees, it's still that the algorithm outperforms the human manager, right?
Yes, so but yeah, we are talking here about the first choice, where you do not have that information that there is this outperformance.
Okay.
So you see, people can only draw on their perceptions here, and indeed, people seem to believe that algorithms should be capable of outperforming the human, but they have no evidence yet. So by looking at that first choice, we just see, okay, yeah, given this absence of performance history, they seem to believe that the algorithm is the superior choice.
But do you know, I mean, if they're on different blocks later on, whether this is similar or? Because
yeah, of course, I will show you in a minute. I will show you the decisions they made after observing the histories, which then, of course, are heavily influenced by what happens to them. And you have to, of course, not so much look at this number, because this is just the average, but this is the distribution here. So we have people who see the human outperforming, and we have people who see by various degrees the algorithm outperforming. And that will, of course, then influence what they do in the course of the experiment.
It's still very interesting, right, in the sense that, I mean, if people believe, even the first round from the survey you did before, that the algorithm will outperform, I mean, you would suspect that people might actually, like in the first round, even like choose the algorithm more frequently, because if they believe it's better, then...
Yeah, if they believe that, that is, of course, I mean, you all also see that this belief is not so strong. So if we have these 106 people, and we have this Likert scale from 1 to 5, and 3 is the neutral point, then maybe there are exactly 60% or so who say, okay, I'm a 4 or 5, or even a bit fewer if we have the neutral ones in there as well. And so, yeah, we might not expect such a strong preference for the algorithm, because also this is highly significant, but it's not really far from 3. And of course, we check this, and this is what we find if we just again look at the first round choice. And we aggregated all these perception figures there. And here you see, yeah, the more positively I view the algorithm, the more likely am I to choose the algorithm in the first round. And then if we break it down into the 6 statements, then we see of all the 6 statements, only the return one is the one that can explain it. The others really, do not have any significance here. And we see then some demographics which also might play a role. So surprisingly, men are less inclined to choose the algorithm. Probably because they believe that there is something that humans can do here, and so it might be a case of overconfidence, even though it's not overconfidence for oneself, but for their human compatriots, so to say. So I don't know. So we have no very deep interpretation to that. And then we also see that people who have invested in stocks before, they are also less likely to choose the algorithm. Maybe they also think, okay, there is some human competence in selecting stocks. Whereas that refers to your question in the beginning. Indeed, it seems to be the case that the more risk tolerant you are, the more likely you are to invest with the algorithm, at least for this first round. And then, of course, we were interested in how that will develop over time, and we see a very interesting pattern here. So what we see is that after the 56% in the initial round, we see first a drop to below 50%. And this is quite persistent for several rounds. So maybe some people are disappointed about the performance of the algorithm, which is overall not so much better than the human. And we even looked at this, so in particular in these first blocks, apparently they are fairly equal in their performance. And that means that indeed we see a bit of losing trust in that algorithm. However, over time this recovers, and we see a strong trend here ending up above 60%. And we find that indeed these last rounds are significantly above 50%. So that means that it takes some time before people seem to realize that the algorithm really outperforms. And and this is not unreasonable, because if you just have one or two of these observations, you might still not be able to conclude whether the algorithm is really better. But you might need some time before you finally can conclude that the algorithm is better. And in that situation, then people flock back to the algorithm. Yes.
So do you identify people who are the human fund managers? Because my thought is like, if you know there's this poor guy sitting right next to me, and he's never picked as being the fund manager, it's always the algorithm, you might engage in something like gift exchange and just say like, I didn't do it once, just for a while, but he's picked.
Yeah, that was exactly what we wanted to avoid by not having this treatment where the fund manager obtains the fee. Because by that you would then know how many customers you have, and that would provide all these kind of motives. So in our setting, nobody knows, so it's not communicated to the fund manager that 5 people have chosen to invest with it. It could be that you as a fund manager make your choice and not a single person has invested in you. But you don't observe that. So there is no motive that you can in some way communicate to the fund manager that you are investing.
And you also don't know what the other people make as a return, right?
No.
Because then you might say, like, I'm stupid, the algorithm just make more money, and so if I switch over time, then it would be more beneficial for me than I know that over time.
No, the only thing you observe is what you get, and of course you also observe the decisions and outcomes of the algorithm and the fund manager. So you can infer what the other group or the other people made that shows the other intermediary.
Okay.
So you have the performance difference between the two also corresponds to the performance difference between you and other participants in the experiment. So and then of course we took a look into how people respond to performance, and the most obvious thing to do is of course to look at the cumulative payoff of the algorithm versus the human in the session these people are in. And we see here that indeed the higher the payoff of the algorithm is, the more likely are people to choose the algorithm. And on the other hand, the higher the payoff of the human, the less likely are you to choose the algorithm. And of course you can also just look at the very last round, and you also see the people who chose the algorithm in the last round, they are more likely to stick with the algorithm. So there is a bit of a status quo effect here, so you are rather more likely to stick with the intermediary you already invested in. But then we try to interact that, so interacting this prior investment with the performance to find out whether you react differently to the performance by your own intermediary versus the intermediary of your the performance of your counterpart, and this is not the case. So yeah, overall we see that people strongly react to performance, but there is not any visible difference between the performance of the algorithm or the human. Yeah, but of course we wanted to dig deeper here. So first of all, we plotted here then the payoff difference between the two intermediaries, and yeah, it's almost monotonous here, as you see. So if you observed an outperformance of the human by €6, you only have a probability of 17% to choose the algorithm. And so on until with these numbers here, you almost choose the algorithm with 80% probability. Yeah, and probably yeah, one more remark here. Of course, this is the zero, where you observe equal performance, and indeed, with equal performance, people are more or less 50-50. So no preference for either intermediary.
So if I read it correctly, that means that even if the algorithm outperforms by 12, there is still 1 out of 5 people who still adopt the human method.
Yes.
Which is a pretty strong result, I guess, right?
That is, well, yes, you can say there are some die-hard fans of either intermediary. Yes, that is certainly true. That maybe, well, you have always participants that may hold strange beliefs, for example, that there might be some sort of mean reversion, for example, going on. So maybe thinking, oh, the algorithm is riding his luck pretty strongly, so there might be a reversal or something like this. Yeah, or they just totally do not trust the algorithm. So yeah, so we have not. We do not have more information on these particular people. Yeah, maybe one could look at them. Yeah, what is especially important for this theory that people lose trust in algorithms after they make a mistake is, of course, what happens if they make mistakes. And mistakes here first interpreted as negative performance. So we look separately at cases where the algorithm outperforms and where the human outperforms. And the prediction would be that these coefficients here should be larger than these coefficients because the literature says that people react more strongly to negative performance of the algorithm. And well, they indeed are. So we tested this, whether these coefficients are equal, and well, the p-values are not there. So so the difference is not significant. So yeah, it is maybe very weak defending evidence for this to be the case. And the same is true if you just look at the very last payoff period before. Then of course you can also count the number of errors directly. So here errors in choosing the inferior asset, and here as well no real difference between errors made by the algorithm and errors made by
So if you test this with a wall test, and I'm not really sure I'm right here, but I mean then you're testing whether the two coefficients are jointly different from each other, right? Or two regressions. What you could also do is just run the regression and put an interaction term for the cutoff level and human or not, right?
Yeah, there are several ways to test this, yes. So here we chose the wall test to directly compare these coefficients. So meaning actually the wall test tests whether the difference between the two coefficients is different from 0. Yeah, you can of course also do interactions, as we did before, but in the interactions also nothing is really there. Yeah, so and therefore, yeah, we cannot really confirm this story that people lose trust in algorithms. Good. So we have some additional results that I don't want to go into. So we have a typical recency effect. So for the choices of people, the last periods, in this case the last 3 periods matter most, and then the earlier periods lose their impact. If we also look at the switching behavior of participants, so, and we find that on average over the 10 rounds, participants switch the intermediary twice. And quite often they switch when it is optimal to switch, again from a Bayesian perspective, but they do it more frequently. So a Bayesian would switch about 1 time over the experiment. Yeah, but there is no real difference for switching from the human to the algorithm and vice versa, again, based on this idea of errors. And the final thing we looked at was actually whether people are able to separate skill from luck, because we had a previous paper on this and found that people's ability to identify skill is quite poor. And what is skill in this experiment? Well, this is the expected return based on your choice. And whereas luck is the actual return minus the expected return. So because, of course, for each of your decisions, we can calculate an expected return based on the state we are in and the potential outcomes of the assets. But then only one draw of these assets is realized, and there you can be lucky or you can be unlucky. And what we see here is that when you look at the total payoff of the algorithm, then this is of course mostly driven by skill, because luck on average should be 0. Yeah, you have sometimes you're lucky, sometimes you're unlucky, and this is indeed the case. So this is more or less 0. But of course, the variance here is much larger. So that means that for any given outcome, so luck will be a strong determinant on what people see. And so that is why, of course, luck can make it hard to identify the true skill. And we see the same more or less here for the human. And we can identify, well, the payoff difference, 53% come really from skill. And only 5 cents come, or 6 cents come from differences in luck. As we would expect this to be. And we also see that the human fund manager makes more errors. And so the question is whether people can identify skill from luck. And here we run a regression whether the choice of the algorithm rather depends on skill or luck, and what we see is a relatively strong result. So of course the total pair of difference is relevant, and then we split it up into skill and luck, and we see the only factor that loads is luck and not skill. And if we throw both of them together, then again luck dominates. And if we look at the errors, then we again see that what matters most is the exposed errors. And exposed errors are, of course, driven by luck rather than the ex-ante errors. Yeah, so this is relatively bad news for people's ability to identify a skillful investor. Okay. So this was the experiment, and then I, of course, started to present this experiment, and people pretty quickly said, well, you have students. You have students in the lab, and we don't believe that students tell us anything about how real people behave. Yeah. And so, okay, so yeah, what can we do about that? And then we said, okay, we can run a study with representative Germans. And so we did this with YouGov. So the problem here is, of course, you cannot run an experiment like I presented before. Yeah, so because that would require this interactive nature, and you are reduced to asking survey questions. And so we did our best to translate a bit of our design into these survey questions. And we started off by asking people whether they know what an investment algorithm is. And 29% said yes. And then those who said yes, we also asked for a description. So we haven't looked into the verbal answers yet, so whether that makes sense what they answered here. But of course, what you see and what you might have suspected is that, of course, within the general population, this is not a very familiar term, and even less so when we ask them whether they have ever invested with a robo-advisor. Only 2% say that they have. Yeah. So I think quite reasonable numbers. What is then more interesting is whether they would invest if they had, so the question was framed in a hypothetical way, of course, if they had 20,000 euro, we asked them, and they wanted to make a long-term investment, whether they would choose an investment algorithm or a human fund manager. And of course, 35% only said that they would choose an algorithm. Perhaps reasonable given that this is not well known. And for me, the most important figure is the percentage of those who know what an algorithm is. There we have 48% choosing the algorithm. And yeah, so we could say, okay, 48% to 56 from the experiment is not too different, but of course other people might disagree on this interpretation. Yeah. And of course, well, the final figure, well, this is of course a selected group of people, so who already has invested with an advisor might be more prone to do that. And then we also ask people of their perceptions, and the same perceptions we ask our student participants. And you might see two things. The first is that the lines here from the general populations are much flatter than those with the students. So students seem to have clearer perceptions on each of these statements. Yeah, whereas with the participants in that survey, well, it's almost flat. Yeah, they have some bumps here in when it comes to data aggregation, which goes in the same direction as with the student data. Yeah, but in general, they do not have very strong opinions. What we see here is that those who know what an algorithm is, they have in general more favorable opinions about the algorithm. But maybe not much more. Good. So we had in the moment still thinking what we want to do with this data. Whether they are useful as an inclusion or robustness test for our results.
But that's also clearly due to the sample size, right? I mean, in the survey you had more than 1,000 or 2,000 observations, right? And then the experiment around 100. So the standard errors come down, which makes the lines more flat, I guess.
Yeah, well, that would be if you assume that the student results are driven by some outliers there. But if it's real, it's real differences in this perception, then you would not mechanically see this relationship. So if we had asked people on things where they have relatively strong opinions, then the standard errors might differ, but the means should be more or less the same. So I would think that quite a lot of people pressed 3 in that survey because they simply had no opinion about that. Or where even, I mean, you see that some of these terms are, of course, we translated that to German, but and try to find ways to formulate that in relatively easy terms. But still, there might appear some words that you're just not familiar with, and that's why people then click 3, and only the ones who have some opinion will then move the average a bit. Maybe we will somehow in the next version of the paper integrate that survey here as a robustness test. Okay, so to conclude, so we find some evidence that investors perceive algorithms as more capable in the financial setting. So that is at least the takeaway from our survey questionnaire. And then in the experiment, we observed that mainly people choose the intermediate who delivers better returns. And they do not show different sensitivity to performance of humans or algorithms. And in particular, if you look at errors, then these exposed errors are punished similarly. So whether you are a human or an algorithm, if you make an error, that will have consequences, and many of the same magnitude. And the final result, the investors cannot really distinguish between skill and luck when they evaluate this performance. But the overall conclusion is that we do not see algorithm aversion in our experiment.
Thank you very much. It's really interesting to look into the reaction of investors and humans to how algorithms perform. You're of course in finance, but is algorithm aversion a topic that also is meaningful outside of finance?
Yes, so the first results were actually coming from other domains.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you look into the earliest research by Neil and others, that was coming from for medical research, where the question was whether doctors are superior to statistical procedures to identify, for example, in the psychiatric field. And there, of course, the results were that statistical rules outperform, but people do not really believe that this is the case, or they still have some trust in the expert, the doctor. And then, this Lead-Post et al. Study more thoroughly looked into that specific issue by providing people with certain subject areas where they should make judgments. For example, the performance of students in a university context, where it is the question whether you should have a selection committee of humans to evaluate each case, or whether you simply run an algorithm. And then, of course, in real life, there are also some other concerns. You might have ethical concerns and whatnot. But in that experimental context, of course, you could focus on the payoff consequences. So you are paid by the performance of the human or the algorithm, and you choose which one you want to tie your incentives to. And then they found this algorithm aversion in various fields. So university performance, and they just took some random subjects, actually, like this predicting air traffic. And there are a number of fields where this was examined. There is a new paper by Don Moore and others who actually claims the opposite, that there is algorithm appreciation. And so it's pretty much, even outside of finance, it's pretty much a debate going on what really is.
Because it's interesting, because when you look at healthcare and finance, what they have in common is that they're both white-collar work, professional services, right? And it's not surprising in a way that in healthcare they don't like the algorithms so much, whereas in finance they do. Because I was wondering, what does it explain that you don't see a whole lot of algorithm aversion? Could it be that the domain of finance is pretty clear in terms of what matters, right? Making money, boosting return. And I could imagine that investors are fairly, I'm not very much into finance, but I could imagine that investors are fairly pragmatic in terms of, like, let's try how the algorithm performs, and if it doesn't perform, then I'll just go elsewhere. But I'm not avoiding it because I fear it.
So that was, one hypothesis is that it is context dependent, and that there are areas where, of course, you're more likely to trust the algorithm as opposed to other areas. And indeed, our perception when starting this project also was that finance should be a field where algorithms more or less have a natural habitat, so where they could perform well. But still, you have not just, you should not overinterpret your own perception coming from a particular field, such as finance, when it comes to maybe the general population, or even our students, which also come from different fields. So they may not share this view. And you also know that the active fund industry is still alive and well, and how is that possible if people would think that there is nothing to gain from human expertise in investing? So that is, so we have seen a rise in passive investment, suggesting that people realize that there is it might be a good strategy just to go with the market, but still I think many people also believe that there is some human factor to that.
Which is not surprising, because it's not that all of a sudden the algorithms are there and the humans are gone. It's a process, right? One comes in, the other becomes less important than it used to be, but it's still there.
Yeah, that's possibly true. So with the 56% in the initial round, yeah, so that was, I mean, if we had found 80-90%, we would perhaps be surprised saying, okay, that is, yeah, so there are, apparently there are different opinions about that, yeah, so, and this is probably also how it will be in the market then, so people will separate into their preferred investment vehicles. So some will go with the algorithm and some will go with the human manager. There's nothing to say against that, but the question, of course, is how large will that market become? Yeah, so in the moment we are rather at 2% versus 98%. So, and the question is whether we will be at 56% anytime soon, or whether it will stay rather at 2-3% over the next decade or two. Yeah.
I guess the decision environment might also play a big role, right? I mean, if you think about it, if you're choosing an algorithm, it's mostly that you're sitting alone in your computer and like you decide now invest via Scalable or whatever robo-advisor. But if you decide for a human investment manager, I mean, it's more likely that you're sitting at the bank or a brokerage firm or whatever, and then there's a human sitting in front of you and telling you a story about why it's so good to pay all the fees and and go for the human supervised or the human manager, as to say. So saying that, I mean, there might be strong forces actually in favor of the traditional financial management industry. Because otherwise you have to come up with your own story why you should go for robo-advisor. I guess they're awesome, right? I mean, you could say robos are probably less likely to have biases like the disposition effect or something like that. And there might be good arguments for that, but it's not that the investment manager, the human guy, is telling you that story, right?
Yeah, that is true. So, of course, here in the experiment, we cannot take into account how people then, when they approach their financial decisions, first maybe contact their bank, because this is where they are used to make their financial decision, and then are persuaded into a human advisory model. That is, of course, another force that comes into play here. So, yeah, so we put the two on equal footing. So you have a screen where you make the choice human and algorithm. Yeah, and,
okay, given that we're already a bit over time, I think if there are any more questions, then I think you're more than happy to ask them after the presentation. And we thank you very much for coming to Bremen, and hope to see you soon.
yeah, thank you.